The bitter winter wind howled across the Wyoming frontier, cutting through Theresa Jackson's threadbare coat as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, one hand clutching her swollen belly. The blizzard had appeared without warning, transforming the afternoon journey into a desperate fight for two lives, hers and her unborn child's. Theresa's tears froze against her cheeks as she recalled Harold's cruel face when he'd forced her from the wagon miles back. "Not my kid," he'd snarled, tossing her single bag into the snow. "Find the real father." The stagecoach driver had simply looked away, unwilling to challenge a paying customer, especially one with Harold's reputation for violence. The numbness had started in her toes an hour ago, now creeping upward past her ankles. Each step became more difficult than the last as darkness began to fall. The baby kicked vigorously, as if sensing her desperation. "Just a little longer," she whispered, though she knew the promise was empty. The vast whiteness stretched endlessly in every direction, no shelter in sight. Her legs finally buckled beneath her, sending her crashing into the snow. The cold welcomed her like an old friend, the strange warmth of hypothermia beginning to wrap around her consciousness. "I'm sorry, little one," she murmured, curling protectively around her belly. Through half-closed eyes, she thought she saw movement in the distance, perhaps just snow swirling in the wind. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing Theresa registered was the rhythmic crunch of approaching hoofbeats. Miles Johnson tugged his hat lower against the relentless wind. His horse, Thunder, snorted in protest against the worsening conditions, but Miles knew they couldn't stop. The small cabin he'd built 3 years ago lay just over the next ridge. A seasoned frontiersman who'd spent 10 years ranging across the Wyoming territory, he recognized the deadly signs of the blizzard settling in. He squinted through the whiteness, making sure he was following the correct landmarks. That's when he saw a dark shape against the pristine snow that didn't belong. Thunder sensed his sudden alertness and slowed without command. "What in God's name?" Miles muttered, drawing closer to the prone figure. Swinging down from his saddle, he knelt beside what he now saw was a woman, half buried in fresh powder. Her skin had taken on the bluish tinge of severe cold, but when he pressed his fingers to her neck, he felt a faint pulse. It was then he noticed her condition. Even beneath her heavy clothes, the swell of advanced pregnancy was unmistakable. "Madam, can you hear me?" He gently shook her shoulder, getting no response. There was no time to waste. Miles quickly wrapped her in his heavy buffalo hide coat and lifted her onto Thunder. He mounted behind her, cradling her unconscious form against his chest. "Steady now, boy," he urged his horse. "We've got precious cargo." The last mile to his cabin seemed to stretch forever, but finally the small structure appeared through the swirling snow. Miles dismounted awkwardly while supporting the woman, then carried her inside. The cabin was cold but would warm quickly once he got the fire roaring. He laid her gently on his bed and worked fast, building up the fire and heating water. Once the room began to warm, he carefully removed her wet outer garments, replacing them with dry blankets. Her face was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features framed by auburn hair. As he rubbed her hands to restore circulation, her eyelids fluttered open, disoriented hazel eyes stared up at him. "Where?" Her voice was barely audible. "You're safe, madam. My cabin found you in the snow." Miles spoke softly, trying not to frighten her. "Name's Miles Johnson. I'm a trapper and sometimes guide." She tried to sit up but winced, her hands flying to her belly. "Easy now," he cautioned. "You're in no condition to be moving about." "The baby," she whispered urgently. "I think something's wrong." Miles felt a cold fear unlike any he'd known in his years facing wilderness dangers. "I'll ride for the doctor as soon as the storm breaks." "No time," she gasped as a contraction visibly rippled across her abdomen. "It's coming now." Miles swallowed hard. He'd helped birth countless foals and calves in his ranching days, but never a human baby. "What's your name, madam?" Theresa Jackson." Another contraction seized her and she bit back a cry. "All right, Miss Theresa, I'll help you through this." He tried to project confidence he didn't feel. "But I need to know what happened. How'd you end up alone in that blizzard?" Between increasingly frequent contractions, Theresa explained how her husband had abandoned her, denying paternity though the child was certainly his. "Harold always had a wandering eye," she explained, grimacing. When I confronted him, he accused me of the same. Today, he finally made good on his threats to be rid of me. Miles felt anger rise in his chest. In his 32 years, he'd seen men do terrible things, but abandoning a pregnant woman in a Wyoming winter struck him as particularly despicable. "Well, he's not here, but I am," Miles said firmly, "and we're going to get through this together." The labor progressed rapidly, perhaps accelerated by Theresa's ordeal in the cold. Miles positioned her by the fire, bringing every clean cloth he owned. When the moment came, he guided her through each push with steady encouragement. "One more," he urged as dawn approached, the storm still raging outside. "I can see the head." With a final, powerful effort, Theresa brought her daughter into the world. The baby's lusty cry filled the cabin as Miles quickly cleaned and wrapped her in a soft flannel shirt. "A girl," he announced, his voice thick with emotion as he placed the tiny bundle in Theresa's arms. Perfect and strong, Theresa gazed down at her daughter through tears. "Hello, little one, we made it." Miles busied himself tending to Theresa and cleaning up, constantly checking on mother and child throughout the day. The blizzard continued unabated, sealing them inside the small cabin. By evening, Theresa's fever had risen alarmingly. "Childbed fever," she murmured, recognizing the symptoms from her sister's difficult birth 2 years prior. Miles listened carefully. "If I don't make it, none of that talk," he interrupted firmly. "You're going to be fine." "If I don't," she persisted, "her name is Emma. Please find her a good home with a kind family." Miles mixed a tea of willow bark, hoping to break her fever. "You'll raise Emma yourself, and that's that." Through the night, he bathed Theresa's forehead with cool cloths while keeping the baby fed with diluted goat's milk from his small stock. He spoke continuously, telling stories of his travels across the territory, describing the beauty of Wyoming in spring, anything to keep her fighting. Near dawn, her fever broke. Miles found her awake, watching him rock Emma by the fire. "You're good with her," Theresa observed weakly. Miles smiled down at the infant. "Had plenty of practice with my sister's children back in Missouri, never thought I'd have any of my own out here." He looked up, meeting Theresa's gaze. "You gave me quite a scare." "Seems I owe you 2 lives now," she replied. "I don't know how I'll ever repay such a debt." "No debt between friends," Miles said simply. The storm lasted 3 more days. In that time, a tentative routine developed. Miles hunted briefly when the weather allowed, keeping them supplied with fresh meat. He showed Theresa how to use various herbs from his stores for healing. In the evenings, they talked by the fire while Emma slept. Miles learned that Theresa had grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher. She'd married Harold Jackson at 19, seduced by his promises of adventure in the West. The reality had been far different, a series of mining camps and rough settlements where Harold drank away most of his earnings. In turn, Theresa discovered that Miles had come west after the war between the states, unable to settle back into Missouri farm life after what he'd witnessed as a young soldier. He'd found peace in the mountains, trading furs and occasionally guiding parties of hunters or land surveyors. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked one evening as they shared coffee. Miles considered the question. "Used to think solitude was what I wanted, now I'm not so certain." When the weather finally cleared, Miles saddled Thunder. "I'll ride to Fort Bridger. The doctor should check you both, and you'll need supplies for the baby." Anxiety flickered across Theresa's face. "You'll come back, of course," he assured her, surprised by the question. "This is my home. I meant, we could be gone when you return, if that's what you prefer." Miles adjusted his hat, avoiding her eyes. "Where would you go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I have an aunt in California. Perhaps she'd take us in." Miles paused at the door. "I'd prefer if you stayed, at least until spring makes travel safer for the little one." He hesitated, then added, "And I've grown fond of the company." The trip to Fort Bridger took 2 days. Miles returned with the doctor, a gruff but kind man named Simmons, who pronounced both mother and child remarkably healthy given their ordeal. "She's a fighter," Simmons said of Emma. "Like her mother." Before leaving, he pulled Miles aside. "That woman needs a proper roof over her head, Johnson, not some temporary arrangement." "I'm working on it," Miles replied quietly. As January gave way to February, Miles expanded the cabin, adding a small separate room for Theresa and Emma. The physical labor felt good after years of solitary habits. More surprising was how naturally Theresa fit into his life, her presence filling spaces he hadn't known were empty. They developed a comfortable partnership. Theresa took over cooking and mending, skills that had always been utilitarian chores for Miles. He showed her how to identify animal tracks, predict weather changes, and use his small collection of books to plan a vegetable garden for spring. Emma thrived under their joint care. Miles crafted a cradle from pine lined with soft rabbit fur. He found himself spending evenings simply watching the child sleep, marveling at her tiny fingers and the perfect curve of her cheek. "She looks like you," he observed one night. Theresa smiled. Around the eyes, perhaps, the rest must be from Harold's side. Miles frowned at the mention of her husband. "Have you thought about what you'll do when the pass is clear?" Theresa's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. "I should find work. Perhaps as a seamstress or cook in one of the larger settlements. Or you could stay," Miles suggested, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. "The cabin's bigger now, land's fertile enough for a proper garden, good hunting." Theresa studied him carefully. "As what, Miles?" "Your housekeeper, as my wife," he said, surprising himself with his directness. "If you'd consider it," her expression softened. "We've known each other barely 2 months. I've known some men for years and wouldn't trust them to water my horse," Miles replied. "Time isn't always the best measure." Theresa set aside her sewing. "What about Harold? Legally, I'm still married. From what you've told me, he abandoned you without means or shelter. That's grounds for divorce in this territory." Miles moved to kneel beside her chair. "I'm not a wealthy man, Theresa. This life isn't easy, but I swear I'd never leave you or Emma unprotected." "I believe you," she said softly, "but marriage should be more than protection." Miles took her hand gently. "I've watched you fight for your life and your daughters. Seen your strength and kindness, the way you hum when you cook, how you read aloud from my books each night." He paused, gathering courage. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Theresa Jackson, and if you need time to be sure of your own feelings, I'll wait." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't need time to know that you're a good man, Miles Johnson, but I do need to be free of Harold before I can make any promises." Miles nodded, understanding. "First thaw, we'll ride to Cheyenne. They have a proper courthouse there." March brought the first true signs of spring. The snow retreated gradually, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. Miles doubled his hunting efforts, preparing for their journey to Cheyenne. One afternoon, as Theresa hung laundry outside, Emma secured in a basket nearby, she spotted a rider approaching. Her heart lurched. Visitors were rare this far from established trails. Miles emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, positioning himself protectively between his makeshift family and the stranger. The rider stopped a respectful distance away. "Afternoon," he called. "Looking for a woman named Theresa Jackson." Miles kept his rifle ready. "Who's asking?" "Name's Porter, sheriff from Rock Springs." The man removed his hat. "Got news she might want to hear." Theresa stepped forward. "I'm Theresa Jackson." The sheriff nodded. "Madam. Came across information you should know. Your husband, Harold Jackson, was killed in a saloon fight 2 weeks ago in Rock Springs." The news struck Theresa like a physical blow. Despite everything, Harold had been her husband for 6 years. How did it happen? "Accused the wrong man of cheating at cards," Porter explained. "Man was Lee Webster, notorious gunslinger passing through. Jackson didn't stand a chance." He reached into his saddlebag. "Found these papers on him, deed to a small claim near the Sweetwater. According to territorial law, as his widow, it's yours now." Miles finally lowered his rifle as the sheriff handed over the documents. "How'd you find Mrs. Jackson way out here?" Stagecoach driver remembered dropping a pregnant woman during the January blizzard. "Word got around about a trapper who rescued her. Territory's big, but news travels." After the sheriff departed, promising to send official documentation of Harold's death, Theresa sat silently by the fire, the mining claim papers in her lap. "I don't know what to feel," she admitted as Miles joined her. "Relief, guilt. He was a hard man, but once we were happy." Miles gave her space to process her emotions, taking Emma so Theresa could have a moment alone. Later that evening, she found him outside, pointing out stars to the baby. "I think I would like to see this claim," she said. "Not to live there, but to understand what Harold left behind." Miles nodded. "We can make the journey after Cheyenne." The trip to Cheyenne took a week, with stops along the way to rest Emma. The growing settlement impressed Theresa with its wooden sidewalks and proper stores. While Miles arranged for official documentation of Harold's death to be recorded, Theresa purchased fabric and supplies with money Miles insisted on providing. "Consider it an investment in our future," he said when she protested. The journey to Harold's claim near the Sweetwater revealed a small, crude cabin and a played-out mine shaft. Whatever gold Harold had hoped to find had clearly eluded him. "Not much of a legacy," Theresa remarked, standing in the abandoned cabin. "Land is always worth something," Miles observed. "Good water source nearby, might make a decent way station someday with the right improvements." They returned to Miles's cabin as April turned the landscape green. Miles threw himself into expanding the garden while Theresa planted the seeds they'd purchased in Cheyenne. Emma grew stronger daily, now smiling and reaching for them both. One evening, as they sat on the newly built porch watching the sunset, Theresa turned to Miles. "I've had time to think about your proposal," Miles's heart quickened. "And the answer is yes," she said simply. "Not from gratitude or convenience, but because somewhere between that blizzard and now I fell in love with you too." Miles took her hand, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I'll make you happy, Theresa. You and Emma both." "You already do," she replied. They were married by a traveling preacher in May, with Dr. Simmons and a few of Miles's trapper friends as witnesses. Theresa wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself, with Emma in her arms throughout the simple ceremony. That summer brought changes to their lives. Using money from selling Harold's claim to a stage company, they purchased additional livestock and supplies. Miles built a larger barn and expanded the cabin further. Word spread about the Johnson homestead, and occasionally travelers would stop for a meal or place to rest. "We could make something of this," Theresa suggested one evening, "a proper stopping place for travelers." "There's nothing between here and Fort Bridger." Miles considered the idea. "Means more people around, less privacy. Also means income," she pointed out practically, "and Emma should grow up knowing more than just wilderness." By fall, the transformation had begun. A second small cabin was constructed for guests, with plans for more. Theresa's cooking gained a reputation among regular travelers, and Miles found his knowledge of the territory valuable to newcomers. Emma took her first steps that October, toddling between her parents as they sat by the fire. Miles caught her when she stumbled, lifting her high with a proud laugh. "She has your determination," he told Theresa. "And your sense of adventure," Theresa replied, watching Emma squirm to be put down so she could try again. Winter came again, but this time the Johnson homestead was well prepared. The year anniversary of their fateful meeting approached, and Miles disappeared for several days on what he called a special hunting trip. He returned with a small pine tree strapped to Thunder's back. "For Christmas," he explained, "like my mother used to decorate back in Missouri. They adorned it with carved wooden figures Miles had secretly made, dried berries, and tiny candles." On Christmas morning, Miles presented Theresa with a silver locket containing a small sketch of Emma he'd commissioned in Cheyenne. "It's beautiful," she whispered as he fastened it around her neck. "I have one more gift," he said, suddenly nervous, "but it's not something I can wrap." He took her hands. "I've officially filed homestead papers for this land. 5 years from now, it will legally be ours, 160 acres to pass down to Emma and—" He hesitated. "Any brothers or sisters she might have." Theresa's eyes widened. "Are you saying you want more children?" "I'm saying I want everything with you, Theresa. A family, a legacy, a life built together." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Emma showed me what it means to be a father, even though she doesn't share my blood. I'd welcome more children if you want them too." Theresa smiled mysteriously. "What timing you have, Miles Johnson." "What do you mean?" She guided his hand to her stomach. "I suspected last month. Now I'm certain. By summer's end, Emma will have a sibling." Miles stared at her in wonder before pulling her into a gentle embrace. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible," he whispered against her hair. That night, as Emma slept soundly and snow fell softly outside, Miles and Theresa sat by the fire in contented silence. The wilderness beyond their walls was still harsh and unforgiving, but within these walls, they had created something precious and rare. "Do you ever think about that night?" Theresa asked quietly. How different things might have been if you'd taken another trail home. Miles considered the question. I believe some things are meant to be, no matter the path, but I thank God every day that I found you in that snow. You carried me to your fire, Theresa said, leaning against his shoulder. And you carried yourself into my heart, he finished, kissing her forehead. Outside, the Wyoming wind whistled through the pines, but it no longer sounded lonely to either of them. Instead, it sang of home, of family, and of a love that had begun in the most desperate of circumstances, but would endure through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. By 1880, the Johnson Way Station had become a well-known stop on the route west, offering travelers good meals, clean beds, and Miles's reliable guidance. Emma, now 7, helped her mother with guests while her younger brothers, Samuel and David, shadowed their father learning the skills of frontier life. Theresa often thought of that terrible night in the blizzard, not with fear, but with gratitude. What had seemed like the end had actually been the beginning of a family, a home, and a love that had saved her in more ways than one.